Hey friends, welcome back. Now in this video, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into 3 new DAX functions because they are really powerful and help us developing DAX in a huge way. So I make things a lot easier. The first one is the offset function. The second one is the index function and the third one is the window function. And these functions are available in Power BI version starting from December 2022, I think. So let's explore them. I already prepared the Power BI file, so I imported the free tables, employees, orders, and suppliers. And I also added a DAX table, a dates table here. And this dates table is this time simply a DAX formula, which looks like that. It's already prepared. You can download it from the source section and also provide this specific DAX code as a snippet so you can actually use this in your own. Normally, in most of the projects, I'm using Power Query and the M code to create my table. But this time I did it in DAX because I want you, of course, if you have taken some of my other courses to have both options available for you. Okay, so let's get started. At first, we need to have some kind of sales measure. So that's why I need to, in this case, multiply. We already know that. In this case, I have a selling price here and I have an amount, a column here, which is up there. So I want to multiply those and create my measure, which is total sales. So let's right click on the orders table, click on new measure in here, and then let's write our measure, which in this case simply total sales is equal to, and I go to new line, pressing shift enter, and then I say this is simply sum x, because we iterate over a table. The table is the orders table. And I simply want to multiply the amount column and I multiply it with the selling price. Selling price. Okay. So I close this and we are good to go. So now we have our total sales measure. And of course, as a best practice, normally I would put this into a measures table, a dedicated measures table for better structuring, but I assume now you know how that works. So let's skip this for now and focus more on the DAX functions. So the first one is the offset function. So let's actually create maybe a little visualization. And in order to explore what a DAX function actually does and how it works, I think it's always best practice to have some kind of table structure, because then it's much easier to understand and see the numbers and explore what actually happens later on. Of course, you can use this in any kind of visualization, for instance, a bar chart or any other kind of chart you want. So let's actually maybe create a table for that. Click on table and then let's use the categories. I have the categories in here and it's also increased size a little bit. So I'm going here and go to the formula options and say for the style. And at first, I want to have none. I don't like the style here. And then also for the values, I actually increase this in size. So let's say this is for instance, not 20 is too big, but say maybe 16. Okay. Like that. So that should be big enough. So you can see that on the screens. Okay. So we get our different kinds of categories. And then let's also go to the total sales here and select. Let's make this dollar amount. Okay. And then let's click on take this option here and now we see the number here. So actually this should not set to auto. So this should be actually only 2. So go to and I think that's better. Okay. So we got 1.3 million in total sales. And now we can see here the total sales for each of the categories. So also I've skipped that, but I want to highlight this one more time. Go to the model view and make sure that the model when you build it is always set up correctly. And that all the relationships are in place. I got my facts table, the orders here and I got my dimension tables. Okay. So now I get my report and I can see all the numbers here. Now let's explore the three functions. Let's get started with the offset function. Okay. I make this a little bigger and then let's get started with offset. So let's right click on the orders table here and select new measure. And this measure is simply let's call this offset measure. Okay. Measure is equal to I can hold the line, and because offset is like indexed and window as well. These are modifiers. So they actually create tables, but they are modifiers. That's why we need to use a calculate function. So calculate allows us to change, so modify the filter context of any of our expressions. In this case, we only have one. So referring to total sales. But of course, this would work with any kind of measure you have. So and then we need to put in the filter, and the filter will be the offset. So there's the offset function. And then we need to specify a delta. Say the delta is we would like to have the prior row. So let's say the delta is -1. And then the table we're going to use is the category table, which we have here. So I can say all selected or selected. And then referring to the category or category, which means we want to offset all the categories. This is the table we want to apply the offset on. And then we can simply specify order by if you want, blanks and partition, but we could also close it directly in here and also close the calculate function. So this is the offset function. And let's explore what it does. Press enter and go on here and click on offset, take this option. And you see that we get exactly what we expected because offset is simply the same way as in Excel. So we can offset in this case -1, which means we simply use the prior value. And this is really interesting because it allows us now to compare, for instance. Increase the value of in this case, condiments, for instance, sales with a prior value. And the great thing is that this is dynamic, meaning I could also say I would like to have maybe the -2, so offset of 2. And you see that now it's shifted 2 times. So this is much more dynamic as we have done before, maybe with any kind of ranking column or an index column, which will also trick, we could apply that. Now for any kind of time intelligence functions, a lot of this we were able to do that easier because there were specific functions for that, right? So for date, add function, for instance, which would be able to create something like that dynamic. But for functions like category functions, any other kind of function, which are not belonging to date, is what it was much more difficult and not as flexible as is here. And this -2, for instance, the number you specified here, you could also think of creating a parameter. So a variable in this case, and then choose the parameter, and then based on the parameter, the offset changes. So you can make this dynamic if you want. And just to show you this to you, you could also of course use something like, for instance, 1, so positive value. And if you go here, now it's shifted, of course, positively, right? So you can see the one I'm 13 here, which is this value here. So this offers a lot of flexibility regarding comparing, for instance, different kinds of rows to each other for any kind of dimension you have. In this case, for instance, the category, right? So that's it for the offset function. Now, I said there are 2 other functions, which is the index function and the window function. And how do they differ considering the offset function? So offset allows us to, as the name implies, offset. So either positively or negatively. The index function works a little different because the index function allows us to compare the value to the value of a specific index. So let me show this to you. If I go in here and say, right, click on the orders table, and to be a little faster, that's actually copy, maybe everything here, right? Let's say, actually, I mean, could call the offset. Let's go in here. Let's sorry for that new measure. And let's say this is our index measure, okay, index measure. Okay. Is equal to, let's go to a new line. And again, I want to calculate something. So put in the calculate here. And what we want to calculate is one more time, the total sales or the measure you want to use. And then what I want is in this case, index. Now I need to give it the position. Let's say the position is 1. Okay. And then I need to specify again, my table, which is one more time or selected of my category in my case, because that's what I have in my visualization. I can close this. And then again, I have optional parameters like order by and partition by and so on. I don't need to partition by because I only have one category column here, nothing more. So I can close this one more time and close it, then also the calculate function. I can press enter to evaluate this formula. And now I get my index measure. And let's put this inside, go in here, click on index. And you see that this is what we get. So 251,000 and so on, but everywhere. Everything, because we specified here the index as 1, we got the value from the first row. And we can now compare the value from the first row, which is cheese, with all the other categories. We have, right? So we can simply, for instance, percentage figure of the 113 based on the 251 or the difference. The absolute difference or whatever we want to calculate. And of course, this again, this dynamic. So I could also say here, for instance, to press enter and I get now the 113, or I could also say maybe -2. And then I get the 105, which is from the end -2, right? This one here. So again, this is a lot more dynamic than everything we had prior to that. And this allows us to compare each of the columns to a specific index. And that's how they differ from the offset, for instance, because offset is really offsetting the whole table in one of the other direction. And the index is returning a specific value, right, which we can compare to the original value you have. So this is set for the index. And the third one, which is the most interesting, at least to me, is the window function. So let's explore this. Let's right-click on the oldest table, click on New Measure. And let's say this is our window measure. Of course, feel free up to come with any name you want. Press Shift-Enter, go to the line. And let's say I want to calculate. Again, I'm using the total sales, so it's easier to understand. And we only have one measure. So there's not really a lot of option here for us. And now let's use the window function. Now, the window function requires two values, the from and to, and also the type. The type is optional. So by default, I think I'm not sure if it's absolute relative. So you need to try it. But let's actually be specific here. Let's say we want to start from 0. And then we can specify a value. So if we specify, for instance, relative here, relative 0, and then to 0 and again. Relative, if we do it this way. And then we need to specify our table. So all selected, again, I'm referring to the category here, I can close this and I can also close in this case, the window function, and I close the character function. So what do you think this will return from a window from 0 to 0 and both relative? So let's press enter and evaluate that. Okay, go here and let's take this option. And you see we got exactly the same values as for the total sales. Interesting. So why is that? Let's go back to the window. The reason why we get the same value is because we specified a window of 0 to 0. So actually only one column, one row. And because it's relative, it means that the relative zero position is always in the current row we are. Okay, so 0 to 0 for desserts is desserts. 0 to 0 for drinks is drinks. On the other hand, if we specify this differently, so we could say, and this is the interesting part here, their running total. So if we specify 1 to start from 0, but the 0 value will be absolute. So 0 absolute means that this time we start at the first, in case cheese, the first row. But because we set it absolute as 0, it will always be 0. So the first row in this case, cheese, and 0 relative on the other hand is then going each row by row and using 0 relative as this specific row. And this means we get a running total of cumulative sales, this case. So let me show you. So you see that this works. Click on the checkbox here. And now you see that we got started at 251, but then you got 365, which is simply the sum of those two, then 466, which is sum of those three, and so on. And of course, if that's true, then this value at the end must be the same value as the total value in here, which is true. And this allows us, the window function in that way allows us to specify a specific window. We can't apply, we want to apply and compare it to, for instance, specific value or have it simply as the value next to the category in this. So if I go inside the window function here, and I can of course also work with absolute values here. So for instance, I could say relative here, and I could say absolute here, and let's say absolute, for instance, 2, right? So 0 to 2 absolute. If I press enter and evaluate that, you can see it 365, which is simply then 0 to 2, which is simply the sum of those, right? So the sum of those three, in this case, 0, 1, 2, and this is simply the sum, and this is now shown everywhere because it's absolute. Or we could say, and let's say here it's 0, actually let's say it's -1, relative, and then it's 1, relative, like that, press enter. And you see that now this is from -1 to 1, right? So 365, which simply this one included, or 466, right? Which is sum of those, or 395, which in this case again, it's one more, 1 again. So these three in this case, but excluding the first one. So you can really be really dynamic and specific here what you want to use, what you want to apply. Or this one, since 280 is simply then sum of those two because there is no plus 1 anymore because it's the last one. So -1, 0, and +1, but +1 is empty, that's why it's only go through, and it's in 290. So that's the window function. So you can see those functions are different, they belong together in a certain way, but they are different, and they have different use cases. And now you've seen what they can do for you, and hopefully you see already in your projects. Or in the future you might see and explore how those could help you developing that much faster and avoid using index and other kinds of hassles we have to add to in the past. So that's it for the functions here. I think I wanted to present them because they are really, really great and powerful, and they have been released at the end of last year. And if you have not used them so far, I highly encourage you to try them out. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one. Until then, best guys. Best guys. Best guys.